This is a review of a desktop-compatible 24-inch touchscreen display made by ViewSonic. It's not the first version they've made, but it doesn't seem like it's really a mainstream model. It's probably meant more for kiosk kind of use. Let's take a look at the actual display. So this is the display. I like to do 2 desktop monitors, so here's my other 24-inch monitor. This layout allows me to have the touchscreen display close at hand and have another display not too far away without having to turn my head too much. So I really like this sort of organization with one screen on the bottom and one screen on the top. Unfortunately, this touchscreen, is not really well made for working up close. Ironic, given that it is meant to be used as a touchscreen display. The primary problem is that at this distance, everything looks good. The color is reasonable. Everything looks reasonably properly exposed, and although there is some issue with reflections, it's not too bad. However, I am about 2.5 feet from the display currently while I'm taking this video. If we move to the position that I would actually be in while using the display, it's roughly like this, things get a lot more washed out. You can see a lot of reflections, and the blacks are no longer black. It's not unusable, but it certainly looks pretty low quality. If you now compare the blacks on that screen to the blacks on this screen, you can see how different they are. This is a high quality Dell screen in the background. One of their ultra sharp lines. It's got pretty accurate color, low reflectivity, all that kind of stuff. This has a glossy surface, but looks okay at the right angles. I think the Dell would probably look not so great at that kind of steep angle too. But if we push this display back in order to make it have better color, it becomes too difficult to reach. You really have to have it up close. Let me stand up so you can actually see that. You really have to have it about the distance of a keyboard away from the side of your desk. You can ignore this setup here. That's my fancy trackball. Looks kind of crappy, doesn't it? It's because you can't buy them anymore, so I had to repair it. But in any case, that's about the right distance to have it. In other words, if you're sitting here, you want about the size of a keyboard and a half between you and the screen in order to make it easily reached. But that means that the color is bad and the reflections are bad. If you take this screen and tilt it back, a lot back, another maybe 20 degrees, then everything looks right, but the top of the screen is now dramatically further away from your hand than the bottom of the screen. And so you can tap things along the bottom, like let's say the taskbar or something like that, but then you don't have good access. So in comparison, this is the angle where the colors look right. You can see that compared to the previous organization, I have pushed it back quite a lot. The top of the screen is now actually roughly aligned with the bottom of the top screen. And if it weren't for the horrible reflections, you could see that now things, except for the color temperature, are actually really good looking. The blacks are black. There's no issue with everything being washed out. But actually, in the previous video segment, I was saying the reflections were better in this mode, but I had forgotten. Actually, they're much, much worse. Look at that horrible light reflection there. Look at my horrible face. Yeah, it's pretty bad. Now, you could put the light somewhere else, but I mean, that's a pretty standard place for light to be, in the middle of a room. And oh my goodness, I mean, that is just hideous. Yes, you get better color if it's pushed back, but now the reflections are atrocious. And like I said, the ergonomics are not great. So I can put my finger down here comfortably, but if I want to get my finger to the start menu, that's me stretching my hand out to its full extension, and I'm still about 1/2 inch from the screen. So I have to lean forward to be able to hit the start menu. That's not ergonomic at all. So this is clearly the angle it's meant to be used in, and it's just not ergonomically feasible. Now, to be clear, this is an IPS display. This is a problem that all IPS displays have. So if we look at the Dell display, if we look at it from enough of an angle, it too starts to have trouble. You'll notice that the blacks are no longer as black as they once were. It's just that since the Dell display isn't meant to be a touchscreen, you don't need to have it so close to you that your viewing angle becomes steep and the color stays fine. So in the end, I think this is fine if you can position the monitor up higher. Let's move back so we can see. If you were to move the monitor up to where the other monitor is, so the angles were roughly right, then it would be, let's say, it would look good. But that wouldn't be very ergonomic either. I'm talking about having the monitor at head height. No one wants to have to raise their arm up to touch a monitor that's at head height. You want it to be at arm height. That's where this monitor is. I don't think this is an unsolvable problem. In fact, laptops solve it all the time. I use touchscreen laptops. They look fine at the angle that they are comfortable to touch. So I think that ViewSonic has just not been very careful at choosing a panel technology or configuring the exact details of how those individual pixel elements are configured such that they look good at the angle that you're likely to want to use it. So while I've gone through why I don't think this is a good monitor for me and for using for real creative kind of work, what if you don't care about that kind of thing? What if you just want a usable monitor and you really care about having a touchscreen on your desktop? How does it work for that? The answer is pretty well. So here I have loaded up a website and all of the standard gestures work. So I can scroll with my fingers, I can do the pinch and zoom. All that stuff works just fine, just like on a tablet or on a touchscreen laptop. So that part's fine. I find the glass is maybe just a little stickier than I would like, which is to say that I've used tablets that have a really nice slick surface, phones too, where your finger just sort of glides over effortlessly. That's not true here. This feels more like running your finger over like a pane of glass on your window, or windows, pun intended, I suppose. It's not bad. I mean, it's not like my fingers are stuck to it. Actually, if you do this, they are kind of stuck to it, but that's not really realistic. It works fine. It's perfectly reasonable. I don't find that scrolling is the most pleasant thing because your finger does kind of stick to it a little bit, but it's certainly usable. It's much better for tapping, so like switching between tabs and things like that, that all works very nicely. So on the whole, I think that if touch at any cost is what you want, this totally works. If color doesn't matter to you at all, this works. If you don't mind reflections, this works. However, if you are moderately choosy, this doesn't work. I look forward to a world in which there are more choices in terms of touchscreen displays. However, I suspect that the glass setup here is going to be kind of standard because the need for the screen to not deform and get scratched by your finger if you're going to touch it is relatively high. And so I think that some of these issues, like the glossiness, are going to just be a problem no matter what. And probably having a nice ultra slick surface is more expensive on a 24-inch monitor than a 5-inch phone or whatever. So there you go. That is my review of this touchscreen display. Final note here is that it is possible to have a touchscreen display and a non-touchscreen display together. However, the drivers on this pretend to be a mouse cursor, and so unfortunately there's no way to configure which screen that mouse cursor is going to operate on. It's always going to operate on the first screen. In other words, depending on how you have things configured, touching here could cause mouse events here, or they could cause mouse events up there. The way you make them appear on the right screen is if this has to be the primary monitor. So if you don't want your lower monitor to be primary, that's potentially a problem. However, Windows is relatively configurable these days. So for instance, even though the bottom monitor is a primary one, I can drag my Windows up to the top screen just like you would expect. So I think that that's not such a big gotcha, although it is potentially annoying. I do not know how you could possibly have two touchscreens, though. There's no way for it to be able to know that touch events on this screen should go to this screen, touch events on that screen should go to that screen, because in the end, this is a fancy mouse. In other words, it's plugged in via USB to a USB hub in the back, and touching here tells it to, for instance, send a mouse event to 0,0 in global space. Alrighty, I hope this cautionary tale helps some people, and if it doesn't, then I guess that's your loss, not mine. Ha ha ha.